You know, now that it's Christmas time and all, you hear all these typical Bible texts that are being quoted that have to do with the birth of Jesus, the stable, the animals, the three wise men, and so on. You can't avoid it, really. It's in the Christmas songs, it's in the pictures, in the images, well, in the Christian world at least. And there's this one text that we often quote, and it comes from the Gospel of Matthew, and it tells the story of how Joseph found out why Mary was pregnant, and there was this angel who was explaining it to him, and then it says in chapter 1, verse 22, like this: "All this took place to fulfill what had been spoken by the Lord through the prophet. Look, the virgin shall conceive and bear a son, and they shall name him Emmanuel." And I've read it and I've heard this text being quoted, and I've been like, well, what prophet has said that, and why is it being quoted here? So I've heard that the author of Matthew is quoting a text from the book of Isaiah, and hearing that it is from Isaiah has actually left me even more puzzled. Like why would he quote this text from Isaiah? Like why does he take this random verse from the middle of the story of Isaiah? And so I decided to look deeper into that text that is being quoted. It's taken from Isaiah chapter 7, and here's what's happening in Isaiah chapter 7. Now, we find there King Ahaz. Ahaz is the king of Judah, and by this time the Israelites, they've separated themselves from each other, and they are fighting against each other. And there's the group of people who are living in Israel, the Israelites in Israel, and there's the group of people, Israelites, living in Judah. And Ahaz is the king of Israelites in Judah. And now Ahaz hears this news that the kings of the area of Israel have decided to unite their powers and attack against Judah, against the area that Ahaz was ruling. And when Ahaz hears this, he is horrified, he's scared. I think it's kind of a cool image that's being used to describe his fear, because it says there in verse 2 that when the king and his men heard this news, they were so scared that their hearts shook as the trees of the forest shake before the wind. So really, they were indeed really horrified. And so prophet Isaiah gets this message from God that he's supposed to tell to King Ahaz. And he's saying to King Ahaz like this: "Take heed, be quiet, do not fear, and do not let your heart be faint because of this stuff that you've heard." He says that if you'll trust in God, then you have nothing to worry about. And he says to King Ahaz that King Ahaz should ask a sign from God so that God can show that there is nothing to worry about. He can choose whatever sign he wants to. But King Ahaz has already decided what to do. He has already his own plans in his own head about how he's going to surrender and be political and, get over this humanly impossible and terrifying situation in his own way. So he says to Isaiah, nah, I'd rather not ask for a sign. You shouldn't test the Lord like that. But he's not saying it because he means it, he's just saying it because he doesn't want to. So Isaiah says to him, fine, well then God will give you a sign whether you want it or not. And the sign will be this: look, the young woman is with child and shall bear a son and shall name him Emmanuel. And the point of this sign is that before this child grows up, the kings who want to make this war against Ahaz, they will be destroyed. The whole scary thing, it won't happen. There's nothing to fear. This horrible threat, it won't ruin you. That is, when you trust in the meaning of that name, Emmanuel, which means God is with us. So the idea of the sign is this, that you have nothing to fear when your trust is in God. Now that's the sign that Ahaz is given. Now how this sign actually practically came into being, we don't know. Who was this woman or who was this kid at that time? Well, we're not told. But it doesn't really matter, because the point of the sign was to tell King Ahaz that when they trust in God, then Emmanuel, God is with them. Now sadly, King Ahaz did not trust that message or that sign, and the situation turned against him. He didn't trust the sign. Now, why exactly did the author of Matthew's Gospel choose to take exactly this verse out of the 7th chapter of Isaiah? Well, I'm not exactly sure. Because the way the New Testament writers quote random verses from the Old Testament it's something that we wouldn't really do nowadays. We'd immediately be like, hey, you can't just pick that verse from there without its context. But they did. And so we have this verse there in the Gospel of Matthew, and now we can well see the consistency that it has with the birth of Christ, because there is that young woman, or as it is in the Greek translation, virgin, who gives birth to a son, and the son is Emmanuel, God with us. But now that I looked into this verse from Isaiah in its original context, well, it started actually making even more sense to me than it did before. I mean, just think about it. King Ahaz is being told, do not fear, do not worry, even though the situation is looking terrifying and worrying and threatening, still, don't worry, it won't happen when Emmanuel, God, is with you. And I think that that's the message of the birth of Christ as well. I think that that's the message that we are being reminded of every single Christmas or any other time of the year when we ponder on the birth of Christ and his life here on earth and what that actually means for us humans. I think basically it's the same message. Look, I know it's terrible in this world. I know that there are horrible things happening, and the threats that we see all around us, they're real and they are overwhelming. But the message from God is the same. Take heed, be quiet, do not fear, and do not let your heart be faint. Like it was said to King Ahaz, do not fear, do not let your heart be faint, because Emmanuel, God is with us. And it's only a couple of chapters later in Isaiah where we read this text of a son that will be born and whose name will be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace, and he will reign and he will bring us endless peace. God is with us. He hasn't forgotten. He has a plan, Emmanuel. Because there was a baby born, and he is Emmanuel, God with us. So do not fear, do not let your heart be faint, because Emmanuel, God is with us. He hasn't forgotten. He has a plan. Emmanuel.